You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Please join us at the Open Door. We discuss solidarity, subsidiarity, economic democracy, and nonviolence in light of Catholic social teaching. We explore how to move from discussion to political change. Culture and politics, to be sure, are interwoven, so we care deeply about education and the arts. Our questions often lead us to report on the projects and promise of the American Solidarity Party.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hannick here with fellow panelist Valerie Niemeyer. For the next few episodes, we're going to turn our attention to education. Today, we'll consider the growing trend of homeschooling. Our special guest is Patrice Fagnant-MacArthur. She has been homeschooling her 3 children, 2 of whom are grown, for 17 years. In a welcome effort to provide both information and inspiration for homeschool families, she's managed, for over a decade, the Today's Catholic Homeschooling website. From there, folks can access her homeschooling resource guide, along with helpful articles and book reviews. She herself has written a number of books, including the Crash Course Guide to Catholic Homeschooling. Patrice has a master's degree in applied theology. Let's begin in prayer, as we always do. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who have taught the hearts of the faithful, by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that in the same Spirit we may be truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Patrice, perhaps we should begin by defining our terms. Just what is homeschooling? Is it just doing school at home? What makes it official?
Official. So for many years, yes, doing school at home would have been, broadly considered homeschooling. In recent years, that's become a little more complicated because now there are online public schools. I know in my district, we have an online public school that people can enroll in, which is generally not considered homeschooling. But other than that, it's widely defined as parent-led education. But that can include a lot of options. There are online classes that students can take. There are homeschool co-ops. There are hybrid schools where children might gather with other homeschoolers 3 days a week and learn at home 2 days a week. So homeschooling really covers a broad spectrum of educational options. But the main determination is that parents are making the choice about what their children are learning. And as far as what makes it official, that really depends on what state you're in. Some states have more regulations than others. In general, you usually need to register with your school department, let them know you're homeschooling, and probably provide some evidence of academic progress at the end of the year, which can take different forms. But that's what makes you a legal homeschooler.
All right. Now we know what we're talking about. Valerie.
Yeah. So I think we're pretty sure homeschooling is on the rise, from what I can tell. But do you have any stats that might kind of give us a sense of the reality by the numbers?
Right. So I looked up some statistics from the National Home Education Research Institute. And back in 2019, which was obviously pre-COVID, there was about 2.5 million homeschoolers, which was about 3 to 4% of the school age population. And post-COVID, or our kind of post-COVID world at this point. 2021, 2022 academic year, which was the last year they had statistics for, it was 6% of school-age children. So there definitely has been an increase.
Yeah, I know lots of people who jumped in around pandemic time because that was a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
What are the reasons? I mean, why do you think most people choose to homeschool? What are some of the main reasons?
Sure. There's a variety of reasons that people come to homeschooling. Obviously, in the Catholic homeschooling community, our Catholic faith is definitely going to be part of that equation. In some cases, there isn't a Catholic school nearby or a Catholic school that people feel comfortable with, or they can't afford it. So they'll turn to homeschooling so that they can have that Catholic faith be part of the educational program. Some people choose it for individualized learning, being able to tailor an education to your individual child or children is very important. Even within a home family, I know with my children, their educational programs have looked different, even though we're in the same family. Each child has had different needs. Speaking of different needs, special needs is a big reason why people choose to homeschool. Whether those special needs aren't being met in terms of a Catholic school or even in a public school environment, sometimes that individualized attention can be better at home. The ability to have more flexibility in terms of getting outside help, whether that be counselors or therapists of any type, physical therapists, occupational therapists, whatever the child needs, that can be great. The same thing holds with medical needs. If your child has a lot of medical issues that require doctor's appointments often, you can have increased flexibility with that. Sometimes there's bullying issues in the school for whatever reason. A child is just struggling socially, and homeschooling can provide a break from that and allow them to blossom in an individualized environment. So there really are a lot of reasons why people might choose to go the homeschooling route.
You know, our daughter, we have 6 children, and we only have the one daughter, and she refers to herself as the onlyest. She was homeschooled right through high school,
Mm-hmm.
and now she's the vice principal of our parish school.
Oh, wow.
Which is actually growing. A lot of schools, Catholic schools, are not. So we've had some wonderful experiences with her homeschooling. And then our youngest, very definitely special needs. He was homeschooled, and it certainly was necessary that he be homeschooled. I know you're a person who's not interested in a lot of needless controversy, and good for you. But in our case, we thought that the Catholic parish school was then a different parish. Well, it tried hard, but a number of the teachers really weren't promoting the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that made us, to use the non-judgmental term so often used, uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was like sitting on a tack.
Mm-hmm.
We were quite uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that's just one of many, many different experiences you've heard recounted.
Right. People come to homeschooling for a variety of reasons, and often it's because God calls you to it. It's a vocation within the vocation of parenting.
Are there common misconceptions? I'd say right away, one misconception is, what's this got to do with the vocation? And you're pointing out it's got everything to do with the vocation.
Right. I'm using vocation with a small v, as opposed to, your larger vocation to marriage or religious life. But I know definitely in my case, I was a reluctant homeschooler. God really had to hit me over the head with a 2x4 to say, like, yes, this is what you're supposed to be doing. So I think, people who pray to make the right decisions about their children's education, God will lead you to what that's supposed to be, whatever that might look like, if homeschooling is meant to be the option or not. And sometimes I think it's true that homeschooling isn't a forever option. Some people homeschool for a year or for a couple years, and then they put their children back in traditional school, and that's fine. It's what God is calling you to at that moment that is best for your child.
And the misconceptions. What are some misconceptions?
Well, I know when I was first considering homeschooling, I had this image in my head of this poor, lonely child sitting at a desk in their house doing schoolwork. So I think
actually they're running around all through the house. They're not sitting at any desk.
Exactly. So that was a misconception I had, and I'm sure other people have that vision in their head of these isolated children, being forced to suffer in their homes. I know many people bring up the issue of socialization. How will your children possibly be socialized if they don't go to school? Not realizing that true socialization in the world doesn't consist of being in a classroom with 20 other people your same age in life. And in fact, homeschool children take advantage of many activities with other homeschoolers and with the society at large. They do the same after school activities that anybody can have access to. My children have been very involved in theater in their lives, which has been a wonderful outlet for them. So that's certainly a common misconception. Another one is that everyone's homeschool looks the same, which is not true. Homeschoolers have a wide variety of educational approaches that they take. We're far from a monolithic group. In fact, if you get a group of homeschoolers together, you're going to have some very spirited conversations about how best to homeschool.
Spirited
So that's definitely a case. And people sometimes picture homeschoolers, and it probably was a more accurate stereotype at the beginning, like in the 1980s, 1990s, of like the the Christian homeschooler, the evangelicals, started a lot of the homeschooling movement, where you have the moms and the denim jumpers, and they live on farms, and that's a picture of homeschooling.
I'm just thinking of our Filipina daughter, oftentimes referred to a certain group of homeschool children as the children of the corn.
Oh, good Lord. Oh, goodness. I can add that I thought if you had to have like a certain temperament or level of virtue to homeschool, I remember thinking I would be kind of a wench. Like, I have a hard enough time managing my own, all the other things. I don't think I'm cut out for it, and that phrase that God qualifies the called versus calls the qualified comes to mind. I mean, I think a lot of people think they have to have a certain level of not only virtue, and patience, but also maybe even educational training to be able to do that. And maybe you can speak to that, Patrice. I think that's a big one, that people think that you should have some teaching background to be able to teach your kids at home. Sure.
The reality is the only requirement here in the States is that you have a high school diploma in most cases. And people teach their children from the time they're born. Homeschooling is really an extension of those early days of parenting. People don't think twice. Oh, you teach your children how to walk, or you teach them how to eat, or, all these things. When they're little, you read to them, you teach them their ABCs. Homeschooling is a continuation of that. And you can learn right along with your children. I have worked through many things with my children that I had no knowledge of or didn't remember from my school days. So yeah, you can, as long as you learn with them, you're doing fine.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I have found too is that, like, we forget that children, human beings are really designed to learn. By the nature of our reason, our rational capacity, really they just need to be presented with ideas. And there's just so many resources out there, books, just even through the use of stories. Children are just they're made to learn and to learn the next thing and to incrementally learn more and more and more. And so we really, our job is not so much always giving them the information or the content through our own mouths or whatever, the way it is a little bit more in brick and mortar schools, but it's creating an environment in which they can be presented with ideas and work with those ideas and have some structure and some accountability to be able to kind of be developed as a human and their intellect. But also for us homeschoolers, a lot of times we're very concerned with the formation of their souls too and their relationship
absolutely.
with God. So.
Absolutely. Having that opportunity to pray with your children throughout the day is very important.
Yeah. So were there any other misconceptions that we missed that you had on your list that you were thinking of?
No, that was pretty much the extent of the major ones I hear.
Yeah.
Here are a couple reflections on misconceptions. First, Patrice mentioned socialization. Here in Los Angeles, from middle school on, in public schools, socialization involves long waits in lines and security clearances. And every so often, a school lockdown. And the way home often takes the unduly socialized student past a significant fight, which later in the day calls for police presence. So socialization in Los Angeles is something else altogether.
Right. And it does depend on where you live. Yeah. I live in a mid-sized city. We have, a number of issues also, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like, who are you kidding? And then a reflection on Valerie's point that we are made to know and children are created to learn. There's a wonderful line from Aristotle, actually, but I'm used to the Thomistic restatement of it in Latin, and it's anima, the soul, quodammodo, in some way, omnia, is all things. And the idea is that not that the soul is at one and the same time everything, but the soul has the capacity to reach out to everything. And that's not an artificial sort of thing. That's just the way souls are. Human souls are structured to reach out to everything. And so that gives you a kind of a foundation in metaphysics for this natural inquisitiveness. And I think we oftentimes don't have the ready at hand Christian anthropology to appeal to that. But it's not as if children are somehow little jars of various sorts that we're going to pour things into. The role of the learner is much more active. In fact, getting back to the onlyest, practically the only advice I've ever given to her in terms of methodology, pedagogical methodology, ask questions and then ask some more questions.
Yeah, I don't know, Patrice, if you had any thoughts on that, but the omnia, the all things. I will say that one reason that I have 6 kids and I have always homeschooled, and I was like you, reluctant to begin with, and then convicted that there was opportunities in homeschooling that weren't available in traditional settings, and that it was worth pursuing those if I could do it well enough. I had a priest that told me, as I was discerning, the reason to homeschool, parents have an obligation to give their children the best education possible. And you may or may not be able to give them the best education. So you just kind of have to decide whether, you are capable of it, and keep your eyes open from year to year and be honest with yourself. And so I've taken that very seriously, because it does come with like the hazards of my own my own weaknesses and failures. And,
Absolutely.
and that's part of it too. I heard somebody say it's a feature, not a bug, that we have to confront. I mean, it can be messy because we're just with each other so much, and we really have to confront the poverties in our own hearts as we parent and teach and deal with the what can be pretty big pressures. And so that's a feature, not a bug, and it's one of my favorite things about homeschooling is it is kind of a purifying. I call it kind of a what's that word? Crucible of sorts.
Yes.
Anything going on in your personalities and in you're on the road to sainthood, you sort of gets magnified when you're in contact with each other so much. And I lost my train of thought there a little bit. But what I was originally going for was that in my experience in I was Catholic school, and I think everybody was giving their best effort, my parents, the teachers, and principals, and everybody. But I experienced a very fragmented education where it was like you have this subject and this subject and this subject, and you had kind of a lot of facts that were not necessarily related to the other subjects, and it was not an integrated thing where the faith was at the heart of it. And that's what I really wanted, to give my children a very integrated experience of the faith and how it extends through all the subjects. And it just related to what you said, Jim, about the soul is all things, and that it encompasses all our beliefs about God, and our relationship with God is lived out in all the things of creation, in all the ways, in all his ways, within creation and transcendently too. But anyhow, Patrice, do you have any more thoughts on that before we move on?
Definitely that I agree. Homeschooling can allow children to pursue various interests that they might not be able to pursue in a traditional classroom. You can have that integration of various subjects together, including your faith. One of the classes I did when my older two sons were in high school was looking at biology and bioethics from a Catholic perspective, which I thought was very important. So you do have all these opportunities, depending on your children and your own personal interests, to really individualize education, make it meaningful.
Yeah. Jim, where do you want to go next?
Well, just a tag on to what you were saying, Valerie. Hilaire Belloc has a line, the faith is not so much taught as is breathed in. And I think his appeal to the climate of a home, to the climate of a homeschool is on the mark. Nonetheless, and Valerie was mentioning how our personalities can get in the way. Nonetheless, sometimes homeschoolers do make mistakes. I remember very well that we ourselves made a mistake once in 1994.
One.
But it was preceded by other mistakes and succeeded by many other mistakes. So, what are some? Yeah, you blew it with that one.
Well, I don't know. I mean, looking back, there's things I wish I could have done differently. But I think, rooted in prayer, you get up every day and do the best you can. And you have to have the realization that if they're in a brick and mortar school, that isn't perfect either. Like, there's no perfect educational solution. There's going to be gaps in education, regardless if you're homeschooled or you go to a traditional school. There's going to be issues with socialization in either environment. We live in a fallen world. There's no perfect solution.
Yes.
So you don't want to mention anything specific. Well, I can tell you back in 1994 just what happened. No, I won't. My motto is don't talk out of school.
Mhm.
What about you, Valerie? Did you ever blow it big time?
Oh goodness, there's so many things that I can name in terms of failures, but I mean, I slowly just kind of burnout was for me. I mean, I started out of the chute very ambitious, with my first child, and I set the bar very high. And then, you know, over the years, I mean, the bar just kept getting lower and lower because my capacity to, it was as six, ultimately six kids, and my capacity to manage it. I mean, I'm a mom with ADHD, which became increasingly clear. Girls and women are often underdiagnosed with kind of neurodivergent things, but it became increasingly obvious that I had. So I struggled with a lot of depression and anxiety because I didn't feel like I could manage it as well enough as I wanted to. I had some perfectionism. My expectations were too high of myself and my kids. And that created tension that, got into the relational dynamics. And at some point I realized, I was being too rigid and perfectionistic about it, and it gave me anxiety, which undermined my relationship with my kids. And I realized, that was the most important thing, was the relationship with the kids. And so I was kind of white knuckling it in a way that was kind of undermining the whole purpose of the enterprise, which is to, have hearts that are turned towards God. And when the representatives of God who are supposed to be representing his love in your life are not necessarily doing that as well, then that defeats the purpose. So, but then I also kind of swung the pendulum too much the other way. And over the years, I ended up kind of lowering the bar too much. And I needed to have reached out for help and gotten involved with something outside of my own. We've been hybrid homeschooling the last 2 years, and I really should have done that a lot sooner, gotten the help we needed to be able to manage things, some accountability, some structure that we needed, because we're all ADHD in my family, and it can be pretty messy. So, I mean, that's just one example in my story. So, yeah.
I think most long-term homeschoolers have that story of, having that enthusiasm that you start with and the idealistic vision, and then reality hits that brutally.
Yeah.
And then and trying to make those adjustments as you go through. And once again, for each child, trying to figure out, okay, what does this child need? And how do I build the relationship with this child? And how do they still learn how to do math and write and all the things? And it's a challenge.
It is. And you're right. I do think that the number one thing is just the acceptance of our own poverties and limitations and our kids, and that recognition that there's no perfect educational setting, and just being able to kind of rest in those poverties and limitations, and invite God's grace to just use it all for his purposes. Right.
And as you said, you don't need to go it alone. There's so many resources out there now for homeschoolers and homeschool communities, and even hiring a tutor if you need to for a specific subject. You don't have to take on that full burden.
Correct. Or hiring somebody to help dust and clean if you can, or just grandmas and grandpas are invaluable if they live in town, right?
We did in high school, last 2 years of high school, hire a math tutor. And another thing with education, it's so unpredictable. The math tutor was very good. When our daughter went off to university, she was going to be a math major. And then, as she reported, the math teacher, first math teacher she had in college, Thomas Aquinas College in not California, but University of St. Thomas in Houston, very receptive to homeschool kids. Her math teacher's high heels made such a clickety-clack sound that she just couldn't endure it. She just couldn't go on with the math major. So you see, a deep sense of the important issues all of the students. And in terms of high bar and low bar, generations of grad students in though my discipline is philosophy, insofar as it's discipline, generation of grad students have, should they be so fortunate as to actually get hired, come in with a high bar that their students in college will be like other grad students. And then bit by bit, they learn that they're actually really high school students who somehow have been passed along into college. And so it's I think something that affects other teachers in other contexts as well, very, very definitely. So goes with the territory. Now we were looking at criticisms. What could you say about homeschoolers who have kids going forward into college? What kind of experiences have they had? Have they thought, our kids were ready, or have they thought, oh, brother, or is it everywhere in between?
There are many colleges now that recruit homeschoolers. Like any population, though, not every homeschooler is looking to go to college. It depends on the individual. We raise them as homeschoolers. You've taken the path less traveled. And homeschoolers are often very independent and have their own ideas about what their future is going to look like. So yes, some may certainly pursue the college route and do very well there. Others may choose to go to work, start their own businesses, go into the military, what have you. So the options are wide open. Homeschoolers have every option that any other young person has.
And more and more people, I think more and more people by the numbers are counting themselves homeschool alumni. And I would say, from everything I've seen, there's every chance of success that anybody in traditional schools are experiencing, and every chance of failure. Like you said, it's pretty much
right, exactly.
Same across the board, right? It's just
right. Many homeschoolers choose to do dual enrollment through community colleges, or even some private schools have it now during their last couple of years of high school, so they can have a taste of college before pursuing a full program. So that's an option. There's so many choices. It's not limiting in any way.
We had the community college connection during the junior and senior year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big plus. We could have never taught astronomy.
Right, exactly.
At home, the way they can teach it when they have telescopes and all that sort of thing. Yes, very definitely so.
Yeah, I remember having a teacher, my mind went back to some criticism that might be legitimate. And in my early moms group, there was a gal who taught high school math, science, I'm not sure, no, science maybe. But she said, I've never met a homeschooled kid that came to the high school where she worked and was able to really get their papers in on time. That was one thing she said, and I thought, well, yeah, that probably rings true. And because deadlines just aren't much of a thing at home. Mm-hmm. You sort of you get it done when you get it done, and there's more flexibility in that regard, and that can hinder. I think, speaking for my kids, especially because we do struggle with managing things, executive functions in general. The homeschool environment was in some ways a hindrance for us because there wasn't quite enough structure and accountability to help develop those muscles of time management and not procrastinating and getting things done by a certain deadline and things like that. So that's been one thing that's been really helpful for us to get into a hybrid situation where there's still flexibility in where we're at, but it's definitely, there's more good positive peer pressure and adult tutor pressure from somebody other than mom,
right?
Which is also very helpful for my own sanity and emotional state to not be the only one, and for our relationships, for me to not be the only one driving them, towards certain disciplines and whatnot. So that was just something that came to mind.
Well, that's a red flag for me, not getting papers in on time.
Is it? You did
Well,
college?
as a college professor, I have to take a dim view of people who don't get their papers in on time.
I'm curious though, Jim, really in college, how is that? Are most professors, I mean, for students out there?
Oh, we can't stand it when people don't get their papers in on time.
Yeah.
We sometimes dock them points.
Yeah.
One reason, and this is a good reason, I think, is that you think you've got your papers all graded. No, you haven't. These papers coming in late. Oh, that's a bad reason. A good reason is, again, in my discipline, philosophy, the getting your thoughts all in order and writing a paper is really important. And when you, as a philosopher, you go to philosophy conferences, what you do, oh boy, you read papers. And if you go up to the lectern and say, yes, I know I'm in this session, and I know I'm set to deliver a paper on such and such a topic, but I haven't got it.
Yeah.
I'll give it to you next year. That just won't work. You've got to have your paper. So at some point, I think it's really important to what's our word, right? Internalize this idea of, okay, now it's ready. And I said it was going to be ready now, and here it is. Mm-hmm. Ready or else. But again, I think that when you have that hybrid thing, as you mentioned, that's a big help because there's that demand. Mm-hmm. Also, with community colleges, this is the way it is in Los Angeles, and I'm pretty sure it's that same way. There's an incredible dropout rate of students. I think it's pretty par for a course to have at least half the kids not complete the course. Wow. And that, no, well, why? I mean, there were 50 of us when this semester started, and now there are 25 at the final exam, and every other class session there's been 20. What's going on? That enables, I think, rising homeschoolers to see that some people just don't do it. They just don't do it. And sometimes they can't do it. Here in Los Angeles, at the not at the University of California system, but in the Cal State system, there's a fair number of students who live in their cars. Mm. And there's good reason why they can't do it.
Right.
They live in their cars. And some homeschoolers are fairly well off, and some are not so well off at all. But that's something to see. That is really something to see. And going back earlier, Patrice, to something you said, that homeschoolers choose, in the case of Catholic homeschooling, to homeschool because they can't afford the tuition in the Catholic schools. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a real wake-up call. Why is it that they can't? In our case,
because tuition's high.
Yeah,
I mean, I know where I live. Tuition for an elementary school is about $4,000 to $5,000 a year. Yes. A high school, you're looking anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000.
Yes.
So
yes, and well, what I was moving in the direction of was certainly not to ignore that they're so high, but why is it that they're so high? And in many cases, though, there's a split between the parish and the school. And once upon a time, that wasn't so. Once upon a time, the whole parish supported the school. Mm-hmm. And now, even in our parish, which I think in many ways is a very strong parish, the school does it on its own. And once a year, the school has a representative speaking at the parish, encouraging people to try the parish school.
Mhm.
Good grief, that the parish ought not to be a missionary territory for the parish school.
Mhm.
They ought to work much, much more closely than they do.
Yeah, also, I think, just definitely the plummet in vocations. I mean, now we have a lot of lay people teaching
Mhm.
in our schools and versus religious life, people in religious life, the nun orders and the vocation plummet. And we as Catholics, that's one of our great social teachings is that, a living wage, a just wage that a
Right.
family can support, somebody can support their family on. It's important. So if we want to pay our school teachers well in this day and age, it means that the cost of education is pretty high,
Right.
and like you said, Jim, if everybody isn't invested, in a community, in a faith community, if everybody isn't investing in that, it's definitely going to cause the costs to go up. So, but what not, and one of the good things that we still see is that there's a willingness to work. There's scholarship programs available, and that there's a willingness on parish schools, side to work with families of, have more large families and things like that. So there are still paths, but yeah, it can still be out of reach for some of us.
In our parish, and you begin with your own experience. The Knights of Columbus have really worked to provide scholarships, and that's an excellent connection.
Yes. Well, we talked a little bit about burnout, Patrice. I'm wondering if you, I don't know if you've experienced that yourself, but I know that you do enough work with and for homeschoolers that you have a sense as to what kinds of things do contribute more to burnout for homeschoolers, and what kinds of remedies do people find to be helpful?
Sure. I mean, homeschooling burnout is definitely real. I think most homeschoolers experience it every year around February. Like February is a horrible time of year, especially if you live in a colder climate. Everyone is sick of being in the house. They're sick of each other. You're sick of doing the schoolwork. It's just horrible. And so
February is the cruelest month.
it is. It is. And, and knowing that it's going to hit and saying spring is coming and it's going to get better is so important. But in general, mothers need to take care of their own mental well-being. No one is going to be blossoming in your family if you are miserable. So definitely taking time for yourself, taking a break, whatever that looks like, however you can arrange it in your own life, pursuing some of your own interests is important so that everything isn't rising and falling with how the school day went that day. Getting help, as we talked about, outsourcing, whether that be a tutor or a co-op or a hybrid situation, can definitely help to have that mental break, and to not feel like all this pressure is on you. Connecting with your homeschool community. The people to complain about how your homeschooling day is going with is not the people who send their children to school, because they're just going to look at you and say, well, why are you doing this to yourself? Send your children to school. But your fellow homeschoolers can support you and help you get through those dark days. They can pray for you. They can offer practical suggestions. Those are the people, whether online or in real life, that you want to connect with. Looking at your schedule can be good. Sometimes we overstuff our schedule. We want our children to have all these opportunities, and we might be involved in too many activities outside the house. That can be exhausting if you have multiple children and you're going all these different directions. That can be very wearing. Sometimes it ends up being more car schooling than homeschooling, because you're doing everything as you're going in the car. So any one of those things can really help alleviate some of the stress that can come from homeschooling.
What about alleviating stress by having some of your students who are slackers stand in the corner?
I wouldn't recommend that.
So you take a dim view of that strategy.
Yeah. Sometimes you do need to take a break. No, doesn't necessarily need to be in the corner. Sometimes you say like, okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break and then we're going to come back to this. have a snack.
Let's see how many times you can run around the block.
Yeah, sometimes you just need an
15
exercise break. It's true. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, and I think it's not always our instinct, but one of the things I was going to say, I heard from a seasoned homeschool mom early on, and I still wouldn't remember to do it enough and don't. But she said when she was getting close to burnout or experiencing burnout, she would just get down on the floor with her kids and play with them, be with them, read books, read more books, more read alouds. And so rather than putting somebody in the corner, the better approach might be to sit in the corner with them with a book,
Right.
And reading aloud to them with a good book that you enjoy reading to them. And I think that can be a powerful thing. It's just sort of hunkering down and connecting with the kids.
And realizing that your children are people too. Sometimes they're just going to have a bad day. Sometimes they wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or they, just not feeling well, or what have you. Not every day is going to be wonderful.
Right.
Patrice, you're a member of the Catholic Writers Guild.
I am.
So you have access to some new good books, right? And some of them they might be just the thing for the homeschool child at that moment. You're current. Are there any conversations among recognizable groups of homeschoolers that you think would be productive, really helpful, but you haven't seen take off yet? But in the back of your mind, you think, boy, if we could get, I don't know, these classical homeschool types to speak to the less than classical homeschooling people, would that be interesting?
That is for sure. Yes, those conversations
that could
are
never
always
happen.
No, they do happen. Homeschoolers can feel very invested in whatever curriculum choices they make, educational philosophies. There are some like myself who are very eclectic and kind of pull from different things, but there are others who are very hardcore, like they're unschooling, they're classical, they're Charlotte Mason style homeschoolers. And because we invest so much of our lives in our homeschooling, people just feel strongly. They want to feel like they're doing the right thing. And if I'm doing the right thing, well, obviously you're doing the wrong thing. And so they'll try to.
That's right. I hadn't noticed that before. That's an excellent point. I never got that down.
So I'm going to try to convince you or convince myself of the rightness of the choices I've made. So I don't think people come at it from any nefarious purposes. I just think, we're all struggling together and trying to do what's best for our children. And sometimes, as I said, those conversations can be, very lively. But certainly that respect, I think there should be a respect among homeschoolers for different styles of education. I think diversity is an important issue in the homeschool community. There definitely are more people of color who are homeschooling, people from different ethnicities. And I think those conversations can be meaningful because we can sometimes be a bit isolationist in our outlook. If we're looking at it from, say, a white middle-class Catholic viewpoint, talking with homeschoolers who come from a different perspective can be valuable for both us and our children.
Very good. Very good.
The longer I'm in homeschooling, the more I see, I have friends in my community who do take a very different approach, maybe an unschooly approach that I'm very uncomfortable with because I know it would be a disaster. Yeah. Me running that ship. But
right.
But I can see, their gifts and they're different, than mine. And I see the fruits in their children of a very different sort of composition of like what their days and years look like in this different approach. It's again, there's different opportunities with different approaches, and you can see these good fruits. And the world needs, again, all kinds of people that bring different gifts right into the mix. So, the more I like you said, the more I don't isolate, the more I'm part of a community that will inevitably have diverse approaches and ideas. And the longer I'm in that community, the more I can see, again, the beauty of the diversity and the fruits of it. So, Jim, you had a question about the state.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned that parents are the first educators of their children. And Valerie, you picked up on that. And I think we'd all agree that this was a line used in a Catholic education court case. Children are not the mere creatures of the state. The idea that the state, of course, quite rightly, is in charge of education, and we ought to acknowledge that. And we ought to appreciate that the state understands best how education should work. Given, for example, the state of California, I would like homeschoolers to have more as a basic response. Well, the state might just be making it in some areas. It's badly flawed in other areas, and why we should ever in the world suppose that the state is the ultimate monitor of education. Why would we ever think that? Compare it with healthcare. Why would we ever think that the state ought to control every form of healthcare? Why should we think that in the first place? I think that some homeschoolers are overly defensive. Here's another analogy. Well, we have a war going on, and of course the generals know best. So whatever the generals say, we'll do. After all, the generals know best. My reaction would be, why in the world would you ever suppose that the generals know best? At the very best, the generals are supposed to be responding to the people, not the other way around. I mean, we're not living in Russia, are we? So at any rate, I'm on the verge of a rant, Patrice. Do you think that homeschoolers should cut the state so much slack as they do, or should they be more willing to question the state and say, well, if you think this is important, how come it's not being done in our public schools?
Well, in general, I haven't encountered homeschoolers who are eager to, bow down to the state. We tend to be pretty independent-minded. I'm a member of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I always advocate for new homeschoolers to join that organization as a form of homeschool insurance, because they can advocate for you if you run into issues with the state, and also because they fight for homeschool freedom. I feel like public education has done a great deal for our country. It gives lots of children opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have. So I'm definitely not against public education. I think there's a lot of teachers there who work their hearts out every day trying to help those students. But homeschoolers have the right to choose a different path. And I think people need to have educational options. Does the state have a responsibility to make sure that children are educated? Yes. But there are many paths to that education. So I think, there's a balance there between the rights of the state and the rights of individuals.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is we are both and people. Yes. I love that about the Catholic faith and the social teaching so often. I mean, we're not an either or, it's both and it's unity and diversity. So
yes.
Do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to, food for thought that you wanted to offer for our listeners on this topic?
I mean, if there's anyone listening who's considering homeschooling and is supposed to, dipping their toes in for the first time, I want them to know that it's possible. It can be scary at first. I remember when I first started homeschooling, it was terrifying to get off that well-trod path of traditional education. It's possible. There's so many resources out there. There's people that will help you and support you in your journey. And it can be a wonderful journey once you set foot on it. There's going to be challenges, but it can take you places you never expected to go.
Yeah. And I think, again, like we've said, taking it year by year, kid by kid, Jim, it's a good example. I think a lot of people think, well, if a family's homeschooling, all the kids are going to homeschool. I think your example is good, that you can be called to do different things with different kids, and centering all of the discernment in prayer, right, is really key. I don't know about you, Patrice, but there are people that I know that do send their kids to brick and mortar schools, and sometimes they can feel insecure when they're exposed to the ideas of homeschoolers and the idea that homeschooling is such a great opportunity. And then they wonder, well, am I not doing right by my kids? Or are you, there's maybe this sense that it's not good enough. I know some parents of tremendous faith who have put their kids through the schools, either public or private schools, and their kids have turned out beautifully. Do you have thoughts on that? How to encourage folks who aren't able to homeschool or don't feel called to that?
Yeah. God calls people to different things. And I agree. I know many people who have been educated, whether in public schools or Catholic schools, who turn out wonderfully. And, by the same token, there's no guarantees, no matter how you raise your children. There's no guarantees. Free will is a thing. Our children sometimes make choices that disappoint us. And, you got to take it all to God. And I firmly believe that if you pray every day to do what's right for your children, make the correct educational decisions, God is going to lead you to that path. And you may not see the whole path. You may only see the next step. But, moving forward in faith.
Amen to that.
I have a last tag on about reading, what to read and so forth. And I've taught a lot of logic courses over the years, and I always think that Sherlock Holmes is great. I don't know if you've ever read any Sherlock Holmes stories to your kids. And with every author, there's a kind of an apocrypha, the hidden stories of. People don't know about the camping trip that Sherlock Holmes took Dr. Watson on. They'd been through some rough cases, and Holmes says to Watson, "Better go camping. Get out of London." And Holmes even put down some money for a pretty good tent, and it was a rare time in London where it wasn't raining, and so they went to some of the hill country around London, pitched their tent. Wonderful, wonderful sort of a thing. And middle of the night, Holmes wakes up, has to poke Watson. Watson was a sound sleeper, don't you know? And he has to poke Watson. He says, "Watson, look up above there. What do you see?" And Watson says, "Oh, the stars. You can't see them like this in London. Oh, the stars." Holmes says to Watson, "What do you deduce from this?" And Watson says, "To all those stars, there must be planets out there like ours. And Sherlock, I think there's intelligent life out there. That's what I deduce." And Holmes says to Watson, "Watson, somebody stole the tent." At any rate, there are lessons to be learned on every side. And for us, we're Easter people, and Alleluia is our song, but what's it all connected with? We always end every show with the gospel reading for the day. So many of the gospel readings after Easter are from John, and this too is from the gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does, he prunes so that it bears more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word that I spoke to you. Remain in me as I remain in you, just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine. So neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather them and throw them into a fire, and they will be burned. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Patrice, for joining us. Wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
It was delightful. And what again is your website address?
It's todayscatholichomeschooling.com.
Wonderful. And again, there's articles, and tell us a little bit more what's on there.
Yep, there's articles, curriculum reviews, book reviews. I send out a monthly newsletter with articles from around the web related to Catholic homeschooling.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the good work you're doing, and thank you for
Yes.
joining us today. God bless you on the rest of the journey.
You also.
Godspeed. Take care.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.